I am transgender. Specifically, I am trans-masc non-binary. I've known that in some shape or form since I was 12. I can still vividly remember the day it all started. Staring in the bathroom mirror at a body showing the first signs of puberty and knowing deeply that it wasn't mine. It would take me a few more years, until I was about 15, to find the words to properly communicate that fact. Even longer to settle on the terms I use to define myself now. I've spent the years since living as some variety of trans person. At first as a closeted trans child, as many of us do. Then as a half in, half out queer nightmare. Eventually as an openly trans teenager, at least in the areas of my life that allowed it. And now as a visibly trans adult. This is not a coming out video. I am loudly trans in every element of my life. But I'm 23 now, and despite about a decade of trans life, I am yet to medically transition. Part of that delay has been a matter of accessibility. Florida isn't exactly the easiest place to get HRT these days. Part of it has been concern over the ongoing socio-political state of the world. Part of it has been grief. I had a girlhood. Whatever the hell that means. This is a video about trans childhood and the grief that comes with it. It is, in large part, about my own story. It is also about a lot of other people's stories. Because growing up trans is messy, and I'll speak to that more later. But for the moment, this feels like the most prudent place to start. I had a girlhood. Which is something I'm scared to say, if I'm honest. There are times I've questioned if I'm stealing the experience of girlhood, that I'm engaging with something that isn't mine. But for about half my life, as far as everyone understood, as far as I understood myself, I was a girl. And so I played that role. I engaged with the things that girls were supposed to. The toys, the shows, the small number of games that were allowed to me. I took up singing and writing and art. I was by no means a girly girl, but I wasn't exactly a tomboy either. I found a home in Littlest Pet Shop, Style Savvy, Animal Crossing, and I really loved horses. My girlhood was clumsy and awkward at times, sure. I never really understood the appeal of princesses or why dresses were almost mandatory in most social settings. Makeup made my skin crawl, and when I was 7, I had to beg and plead for a copy of Pokemon Soul Silver. But it wasn't terrible. For a long time, girlhood made sense. Sure, I struggled to get along with girls my age. Most of my friends were boys. And at times, I yearned for the experiences that weren't allowed to me. But I never really hated it. Girlhood isn't one defined experience. I think that's something important to remember in this conversation. Girlhood is, say it with me now, a social construct. Which is to say, what girlhood is contextual. It changes by time, by place, by ideology. It's influenced by class, race, and ability. It is built by institutions and also by ourselves. If we are to define girlhood in the most academic terms, girlhood is the experience afforded, and at times pushed onto, those whose society judges as girls, or to those who define themselves as such. The expectations, norms, and pressures contained within. What defines a girl is just as nebulous. It's not a static, biological, temporal experience. But I'm not sure that's the most useful definition. Girlhood is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I asked those people, well, my fellow trans masks at least, would you say you had a girlhood?
Yes, absolutely.
I would say yes, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like how it's always yes, absolutely, no
Yeah,
hesitation.
yeah.
Growing up, like I said, I was like super into stereotypically kind of girly things. I had all these mermaid books and like these fairy books that I was like so obsessed with them. I wasn't just obsessed with like, oh, fantasy creatures. I was obsessed with the presentation, you know? Just the softness and kind of just the femininity of it all. And I think I'm still very drawn to it, you know? There's a lot of parts of that that will just never leave me.
Back to what I was talking about, like a lot of people don't realize that they're trans or they don't have the language for it until after puberty or after they've been exposed to people who knows these things. So like girlhood just comes with the territory of being born AFAB. Like you get raised and socialized that way. This is gonna sound so weird. I liked being a girl at the time.
Girlhood is something that was very intrinsic to learning who I was as a person, and it's still something that I'm comfortable with saying was a huge part of my life. I think a lot of it was taking things that were traditionally thought of as girlhood and twisting them in a way that felt unique to me. Things like playing with dolls and going, what if I did this wrong on purpose? Oh, we're playing house. Who wants to be the mom and the dad and the kid? And I was like, what if I'm the dog?
If I had to define my own girlhood, it was an experience built on the media I was given. I never liked makeup. Dresses were uncomfortable, and I never found the solidarity that many girls speak to. My girlhood was Barbie Horse Adventures. It was Animal Crossing. It was poorly made dress-up games and pet simulators. It was watching Winx Club and My Little Pony. It was Horse Girl books and Warrior Cats and Harry Potter. Fuck J.K. Rowling, by the way. It was the American Girl doll I learned to sew just so I could make new outfits for her. And I loved those things. I still do love many of them. Girlhood wasn't some terrible experience that haunts me. Girlhood was nice, even, most of the time. Until it wasn't.
There's a lot of pain involved in girlhood. I don't want to fully center my experience around that, but I think when I'm looking back on certain parts of my life, especially when I started puberty, that's kind of what it was characterized by. Before that, there was sort of this magic to it, you know, like everything was so bright and beautiful, and I had so much hope for the world. It's almost this double-edged sword of just like, here are some of the most beautiful, almost enticing things that you've ever seen, and then like just some of the worst shit imaginable. I think the issue with girlhood is womanhood.
That statement stuck with me as I ran through my interviews for this project. The problem with girlhood is womanhood. Over the years, I've come to understand girlhood and womanhood as distinct gender categories, and the same of boyhood and manhood. They are intertwined, inform each other, but the expectations of their performance are meaningfully different. There is a deep sense of responsibility that hits when girlhood shifts to womanhood. A turning point where your body and your future are no longer yours. This isn't an experience unique to trans masks. I've seen many cis women express similar griefs. It's not universal by any means. You'll find it most often in communities and households that are conservative, Southern, or Christian, places where traditionalism is given value. It takes a lot of forms. it takes a lot of shapes. And when it strikes, it often strikes far too early.
Girlhood was fun until all the bullshit started happening. It's fun until it starts becoming womanhood, and for some people, it happens when they're like 16, 17, 18. Other people, it happens when they're too young. Middle school, 8th grade, I think, is the point where like all the sexual shit, where my grandmother was being like, okay, you need to start looking nice and pretty for the boys so you can attract a partner, so you can get a boyfriend. And me being in the online spaces that I did not need to be in or should not have been in. I think that's about where things started falling apart.
Between 8 and 12, was sort of a dynamic change between not only me and my peers, but me and the adults in my life. People started saying, actually, no, it's not appropriate for you to wear that. You need to be more modest. You need to be aware of how other people are perceiving you. There's also a distinct shift, I think, in the community of, for kids, my peers, my age, of kids starting to pay more attention to each other as well, where instead of, playing house, playing Red Rover, people started sitting in a circle and talking about who they thought was cute. And as a queer child who didn't have context for my gender or my sexuality yet, it felt like putting on a performance.
For me, I was 10. That's when I got my first period. And I feel like I don't like pinpointing that as like when things got really bad for me. But at the same time, that is exactly when things started getting really bad for me and have continued to be that bad for like a long time. That's when I started getting depressed. That's when I started getting anxious. That's when I lost the magic of my childhood, I guess. Because then, according to like society or whatever, I was a woman. And I didn't, and I still don't want to be one.
Femininity is centered intensely around appearance. To be pretty is to be desirable, and to be desirable is to have value. And that's something that is reinforced in a million different ways. In the media we consume, in the toys we play with, in the ways we compliment and insult each other. It is so deeply ingrained in our day-to-day lives that, honestly, I don't know how to deconstruct it. I could ramble all day about patriarchy, about the ways race and class intersect with our perceptions of beauty, about the historical roots of our modern standards of attractiveness, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this video. What's important to recognize here is that shift. That moment where girlhood becomes something else. And the ways it can take the things we love.
My junior prom, I decided I want to make my own dress. And I had a design. It was actually a Homestuck dress. So it was like a blue dress with checkerboard. And it had like a really deep V because of the pattern that we picked up. And one of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way was my grandmother said, "You're going to need to wear a push-up bra with this." It made me very uncomfortable that someone else was telling me how I needed to present myself in the article of clothing that we basically made together.
I was keenly aware from a very young age that I was a sexual object, well before I had the context and words to describe it. I felt it in the way that I, a child, was forced to cross my legs in any social setting, out of fear that someone would look up a skirt or dress, out of fear that not doing so would make me a target of sexual abuse. I felt it in the ways I was pressured to modify myself, to make myself beautiful for the sake of others in ways that brought no validation to myself. I felt it particularly strongly in the way people talked about my hair, touched it, often without my permission, in the effort to tame this frizzy mess that no one around me knew how to care for. The way I was forced to straighten it for years of my life in an effort to make myself presentable, regardless of the pain, regardless of the damage. I felt it in the things people would say. There's a stereotype around red hair and sexuality that redheads are fiery, temperamental, promiscuous, seductive. And I had grown men projecting that onto me as early as 7, talking openly about the gratification I would someday bring to a husband. And then there was the constant expectation to have kids, rooted largely in the bullshit notion that my hair color was some sacred trait that I held some duty to preserve. I remember an authority figure telling me at 14 that I needed to have as many kids as possible, that if I didn't, I was in part responsible for my hair color going extinct. As if genetics function even remotely like that. And I couldn't say anything, because to speak up was to be loud and impolite. And to be impolite, to be anything other than gentle and quiet and passive, wasn't proper for a girl. I don't let anyone else cut my hair anymore. Bleaching the bits that I have is an act of protest, an act of reclamation. I love my hair now, but for a long time that wasn't the case. I don't want to take away from the joy that many find in femininity when I say this, because there is very real solidarity, selfhood, and love to be found in its performance and embodiment. I think there is an inherent sexual trauma that comes alongside girlhood, or the forceful exit from it. And maybe I'm projecting a bit there, but it was hard for a long time to look at the expectations that were put on myself, on my body, and feel like I had any worth beyond it. I think that feeling is disturbingly common.
When I hit puberty, I gained a lot of weight. And part of that was because my parents got divorced. And I became incredibly depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up withdrawing, personality-wise, quite a lot. Ended up being very quiet for quite a few years, as well as lashing out a little bit more. And unfortunately, me and my mom together, post her divorce, ended up dieting together quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And part of this was due to the way that people perceive women in our society, and how being anything other than like a below a size 6 is considered to be unhealthy, to be fat, and for fat to be a bad thing. And I think that's something that has been very unfortunately very tied into our culture's notion of femininity.
I was actually diagnosed with body dysmorphia when I was younger because I had a period in my life. It coincided with the J fashion stuff, but I got really obsessed with my appearance and like controlling it because I realized I wasn't enough of a girl. Yeah, I got really fixated on my appearance to an extremely unhealthy degree. Like every time I saw a mirror, I would almost start crying, kind of shit. I had like weird fantasies of like plastic surgery I would get when I was an adult.
I think I reacted to that pain differently than a lot of people do. For the longest time, I wanted to make myself ugly, make myself undesirable, to dye my hair, to cut it off entirely. to dress in ways that hid as much of myself as possible. Anything to escape the eyes on me. In part because, yes, this is where I first started feeling that prickling sense that this gender, this body, wasn't right. But I think more so, I was desperate for my worth to exist aside of it. I wanted to be seen as smart and creative and clever, as more than just a body. I worry, in saying all of this, that I am in some way invalidating my own transness. That people will leave with the impression that my being trans is a result of the trauma I experienced, or that I've fallen for some propaganda. Because nothing I've spoken to here is a unique trans mask experience. I'm under no impression that it is. But transness is messy, and these things don't stop when you come out. They don't stop when you transition. Girlhood was nice, most of the time, but womanhood was never an option for me. And while there are so many angles I wish I could cover here, things that I don't have the time or the space to, that's where the section was going to end for a while. Until, well...
I think I would have loved the opportunity to be traumatized by women's body ideals, personally.
Really?
I think I would have loved the opportunity for that, because ultimately the decision was made for me and I had no agency in it. I didn't get the choice, right? I didn't get the choice to be harmed, or I didn't get the choice to navigate that space and find myself in that crucible that a lot of trans masks and young women engage with. If you're talking about stolen girlhood or stolen boyhood, I feel like that is definitely a part of it. I think some trans masks would have loved to get punched in the face in a schoolyard brawl, or be forced to do a test of courage and grit their teeth and bruise their knuckles. Even though those things, my having interacted with those things was entirely a negative experience. I've always been soft. I've always been meek. But these are things that I'm sure you would have loved to have the opportunity to engage in toxic masculinity to either grow out of it or to find what aspects of it that you liked. And I think those are things that are stolen from young trans youth. Maybe we want to take our lumps as the gender preferred, right? Maybe we want to engage in that trauma.
And you know what? That's a fair judgment of my character. Fuck you. For a moment, I wanted to combat this notion. And I did. I couldn't wrap my head around why someone would yearn for these things. For the constant pressure to be pretty because that's the whole of your value. For the body dysmorphia that nearly took my childhood best friend. I think they had a fair point, though. To be deeply serious for a moment, I am someone who had to undergo therapy specifically to learn how to feel anger. How to allow myself this emotion that I had been denied for most of my life. Because to have anger is to have power. To have the ability to protect yourself. There is no acceptable way to be angry as a girl. But anger is all boys are taught. Boyhood is something I am much less qualified to speak to. I never had a boyhood. And while I may have had the faintest taste of one through the boys I grew up around, through Pokemon, through trading cards, through my brief adventures in the swamp, I don't think that counts. Girlhood is something that people write article upon article about. That people make video essays about, but no one talks about boyhood. Not to that depth. Not to its joys. I can tell you from an outside perspective what boyhood looked like, the things that I craved from it. That boyhood was the allowance to be loud and messy. That it was the expectation to be strong. That it was video games, roughhousing, and competition. But I don't think my words carry weight here. And I don't want to define boyhood in opposition to girlhood. When people do talk about boyhood, they treat it like a problem. Boyhood as the precursor for toxic masculinity. Boyhood as emotional repression and anger and violence. And I think those are meaningful conversations to have, but again, beyond the scope of this video. Point being, I don't think that's all there is to Boyhood. But even if it is, I think a part of me still wants for it. Grieves it. When I talk about trans grief, I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about the grief projected onto us by our loved ones when we come out or start our transition. I want to talk about the ways in which we grieve ourselves. What we were, what we are, and what we could have been. Maybe grief isn't the right word. In many of my conversations, others have pointed to fear or trauma. I think grief carries a dramatic connotation, that whatever precedes it must be a death of some variety. But it's certainly the word that comes to me. There's the obvious grief, of course. The yearning for an upbringing you didn't get to have. About the things you didn't get to do. About the people you lost along the way.
I think my grief manifests primarily in a lack of skill, right? I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm trying to get better at allowing myself to be not complete up until the point where I get to where I want to be. And I think there's a great deal of frustration I have for missing out on a lot of meaningful girlhood. I haven't had a moment where I cut my own bangs or did my makeup, and it's such a common story that I hear of this like experimentation in your physicality and body. And it only took me until my 20s for me to start meaningfully changing how I look and putting effort and work. And I was so much happier after I started essentially taking care of myself. And I wish I had started doing that earlier.
I am a man. I am not a boy. You know, I've never been a boy, I guess. Like, I didn't get to be a boy, and now I'm just a man. So I kind of skipped this crucial step. How can I know what kind of man I'm gonna be if I never got to, like, grow up as a boy?
At least for me. Grieving girlhood, the opportunities that I didn't get to have growing up, where I was allowed to just be a kid, just be me, really came to a head a couple years ago before my grandmother passed away. She sat me down with a degree of clarity through her Parkinson's, her dementia, and I will remember it for the rest of my life, that she's sorry that she never got to teach me how to be a girl, how to be a woman. She never got to show me all these things, and at the time with her health conditions, she was like, I wouldn't even be able to do a ponytail for you. I wouldn't be able to walk you through it because I would fall over. I grieve missing that experience with her.
This, I feel, is the grief we as trans people are allowed to talk about. It's a grief that I experience too, in many ways. But there are other griefs. Griefs that I don't quite have the words for. That I'm not sure if I am allowed to talk about. But anything that can be cared for can be grieved. And I think that includes ourselves.
The me that I thought would exist when I was younger does not and will not ever exist. And that was something I had to grieve, because I had created this idealized version of that was a combination of what I wanted to be when I was younger and what I thought I had no choice but to be, and what I had decided I was okay with being, without realizing how much following through with that path would hurt me. And being able to sit back and go, oh, like, that's never going to happen. This life I thought I was going to lead just is not going to happen, and that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing. I'm happier now. I never thought I would be this happy. But it's it leaves you a little lost, you know?
Yeah.
I don't feel closely related to having a childhood in general. When people talk about having a childhood, I always feel very distant. I don't like anything that happened pre-transition. So it's not that I like long to have a girlhood or long that like I wish I had a girlhood or that I consider having a boyhood. It's more that I view it as two separate lives.
I'm planning on starting testosterone soon. I have an appointment with a doctor, so hopefully that goes well. But I'm really scared, if I'm being honest. And it's hard to talk about that. It's hard to talk about that fear because people view that apprehension as resignation, almost kind of just like me surrendering and like giving up on this or like not really being like involved with this, but that's not the case. I'm just nervous because like I don't know the extent to which this will change my body and my sense of self, you know? It's just this big unknown. I try not to think of transitioning as a death of the self because I feel like too much of the conversation around the trans experience revolves around rebirth. But at the same time, there is still a very real element of that. Like, it's not like I'm being fully reborn, but I might lose a lot more of myself than I'm willing to.
I think I'm grieving my girlhood. If I can share an anecdote, I choked down my femininity for years. Wrote off everything associated with it as shallow and superficial. It's a phase a lot of trans masks go through as they start to navigate their identity, and hopefully, eventually, grow out of. In many ways, I was recreating the misogynistic tropes that had been weaponized against me my entire childhood. Because that's what I thought masculinity meant. Because that was the only way I could think of to create as much distance between myself and womanhood as possible. And then I ended up on femboy TikTok. This was 2020. I was 19 at the time. And as silly as it sounds, this was a powerful moment towards my understanding of gender. For the first time, I saw an expression of masculine identity that felt safe, that made femininity feel accessible. So I decided, for the first time in years, that I wanted to try wearing earrings again. It was something so small, but which held so much weight to me. I used to collect them, and I still do. I thought this was a meaningful step towards healing. Until I was standing face to face with a friend. And she looked at me in confusion and asked, "Aren't you trans?" I didn't wear earrings again for nearly 3 years. She was well-intentioned, I don't doubt that. She was a cisgender bisexual woman who had never meaningfully interacted with a trans person before me. We're still friends, actually. But moments like that scare me. I'm not a particularly feminine person. But there's a higher expectation on us as trans people to perform gender correctly. In the effort of passing or accessing healthcare, or even being respected, we are forced to let go of parts of ourselves. There are things I don't want to let go of. The first time I was able to properly process my grief over girlhood came in the form of Red Dead Online. It was bought for me by a close friend in 2023, nearly 2 years ago to date. And I clicked with the game immediately. Not because of the setting, or the graphics, or the gameplay. Because I used to be a horse girl. This is Pecan. I love him. I grew up on horse girl games, books, shows. In my extremely limited access to media, horses were a near constant, a cornerstone of my girlhood. And that's something I had pushed out of my life for years, that I could barely remember. And suddenly, that fantasy was accessible to me again. There is so much I could say about the nature of the horse girl, but that's a subject for another day. I already have a half-finished script. What matters here is this was the start of healing my relationship with gender. For me, that has meant finding new ways to interact with the things I lost. Both the girlhood that was taken from me and the boyhood I never got to have. It's part of why I jump into mosh pits and get drunk in the woods. It's part of why I DIY with what little spare time I have. It's why I'm fighting to learn to play video games and why I still sing. Because I'm not willing to let gender take anything from me. Which is not to say, of course, that this is the only way to heal, or that healing is even necessary. We, as trans people, are not damaged or injured. But I think there is value in the ways we understand and navigate our existence.
There were aspects of it that like society ties to genders wrongfully, and some things that aren't tied to genders, but just my brain was like, well, you did that before you came out. Are you allowed to do that now? You're a different person now. You're a different person. And learning to enjoy the things I once did was a huge journey. And learning to get over the fuck, I wish I could have got on puberty blockers like, a decade ago. Like, I wish that could have happened, but that can't happen. Like, I can't go back in time and change that. So I guess just accepting myself as I am now. I think content is a huge thing to actually speak on with it as well, because slowly having to find myself again. I was trying very hard to portray myself as in a way that my brain would accept, like, yeah, you're different enough. You know what you're doing. You're streaming, and it's not like it was before. It's different. You're a woman now. I think it ultimately was just a mask I was trying to keep up that I couldn't hold anymore. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna say censored the internet again.
Like, because a lot of my past, like, I dealt with bullying and dealt with harassment and dealt with like other forms of just like hate. I kind of just don't even like think much about my childhood, and I don't really care. I'm kind of just like more of wanting to like be in the present and like now, and kind of be more focused on like maybe being able to do those things of like going out for girls' night, having like the sleepovers and whatnot nowadays.
I think at a baseline, I tend to like not try to affect gender. I'd be very, very comfortable just staying at home doing nothing. Or not doing nothing necessarily, but where I can very heavily curate and control how I'm perceived. The majority of that is stuff I put on for being perceived. So do I mourn experiences from either side nowadays? Do I still try to reclaim those things? I think I'm content with those being fragments of lives I didn't lead.
There is something beautiful about healing as a trans person, whatever form that healing takes. I have felt so much hope in watching others find a joy in the things that once brought me pain. And there's also beauty in the ways we reclaim those things for ourselves. We need to talk about drag. I am particularly excited to talk to you about all of this because you are a trans man who is involved in the drag scene. And we have talked privately about drag as a means to reclaim femininity. And if you'd be willing to talk more and expand on that, I'd love to hear on that.
The first time I performed, I kind of felt like I had to steer away from that, I was not publicly out as a trans man at the time, so I almost felt like I had something to prove. When I started doing more queen-oriented stuff, I realized that this is like, it's not just an alter ego, it's a part of me that I don't want to lose. It is that girl that I was when I was a child, and I just get to bring that out for a little bit. I just get to inhabit that. I get to embrace it. I don't have to be scared of it. This isn't who I am. It's something that I will put on as an alter ego, as a costume, because I'm choosing to, and it's not something that I'll let you force upon me.
What you just heard was an excerpt from a conversation I had with my childhood best friend, a man I have known since I was 9. These are real screenshots of us playing Animal Crossing New Leaf in February of 2014. I was the blue one, because I hated the color pink. It represented all the things I didn't want to be, but didn't have the words to express yet. But hyperfemininity was always his. You've heard bits and pieces of him scattered throughout this video, and in many ways, he was the inspiration. This idea has been floating in my head for over a year now, but his story was the push I needed to finally start making it. I knew going into this project that drag as a reclamation of femininity was a subject I needed to touch on. In all my grief around girlhood, it was something that had never really occurred to me. We talk a lot about gender as performance, and the literal performance of exaggerated femininity as a character one can embody on their own terms. That just makes sense. I knew that drag would be a meaningful part of this conversation I wanted to start. I did not expect every single transmasc individual I interviewed to bring it up. Unprompted.
Honestly, it's let me get a lot more in touch with femininity as of recently. I've been on testosterone for over 4 years now. And prior to being on testosterone, I went through a very heavy femme phase. I was leaning very hard into the full face makeup. I was dressing up and like feeling super feminine in general because I wanted to feel good about myself, and I knew that if I dressed up and did my makeup and everything, at least I would feel pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a way to feel good about myself without having to think too hard about why it felt good. Looking back on it, it's because I was having fun in drag. As an adult, my boyhood that I'm reclaiming is being a boy wearing heels. Being able to be the little guy in a skirt and still be my gender. Having the opportunity to explore femininity from the lens of not being a woman is something that has been very healing for me.
The masculine clothes that I wear, I feel like I put on just to have something on my body. It doesn't feel like expression. Whereas with femininity and girlhood, I felt like I could express a lot more than I can now. And like I have a femme model now that I can change into, and it's really fun. It's really fun to play gender. It's fun to play Barbies with yourself. I got it in my head that drag was transphobic for a long time. That's where I messed up. That and now I've accepted it a bit more. Now I'm like, no, drag is really cool. I want to mess around with this. So that's where I'm trying to like relearn my femininity and be on okay terms with it.
I don't anticipate drag ever being a part of my journey with gender. It centers itself around a type of femininity and sexuality that I was never attached to. But there's something to be said there, right? About drag as a space to explore femininity that has been denied to you for one reason or another. about drag as queer art. There is a social construction of the perfect trans person. Someone who knew they were trans from the age of 5, whose identity is fixed and firm and easily categorized. An expectation built around heteronormative ideals of gender and sexuality, under which identity is a given. And that has never been me. But I'm not fond of the idea that identity is static. Queer identity is a constant process of self-exploration, evaluation, and assertion. We are constantly evolving in the ways we understand and interact with ourselves. And that's another one of the ugly truths we don't want to talk about. And it's understandable why. Trans life is a thing to celebrate. Not to mention that so much as acknowledging negative elements of the trans experience at all ever immediately opens us up to attacks from our opposition, who will find any excuse to tell us that we are delusional, perverted, or otherwise mentally ill. But trans life is also messy. And I think it deserves the right to be. Transition is scary. Another thing I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but it's true. Transition is not a death of the self, but it is a change. And especially these days, transition is placing a target on your back. I think I'm scared, in part, of losing the privilege that comes from passing as cis. Because there's safety in having that option. I am a loudly, publicly trans person. There's no lie in how I present myself. But I am trans in a place where being trans isn't safe. On one of the forefronts of anti-trans policy. And I know myself well enough. Transgression is in my nature, and I have no desire to put myself back in the closet. I know, once I make this choice, there is no going back for me. I didn't want this to be the first proper video on this channel. I wanted to establish myself in the space first, have a clear vision for the content I create. But sometimes life works out in ways you didn't anticipate, and sometimes there's a project you just need to make now. Despite over a decade of trans life, I am yet to medically transition. This video has been, in large part, my frantic effort to put words to a lifetime of gender fuckery and baggage. Because this is my HRT announcement. The day this video goes up is the day I'm gonna start HRT.
Hey! Congratulations!
I had a feeling, but hell yeah, I'm very proud of you.
Oh hell yeah, I love that for you.
That's so exciting! And God, that's such a good way to do it! Ah, you're blowing my fucking Tumblr post from way, way back when out of the fucking water.
Exciting. Congrats, my guy. That's amazing.
You are the only person I have talked to about this before starting the project, so you're already aware. We were literally caught in traffic on the Florida Turnpike on the way back from a goddamn like trans punk event. But this video, the day it releases, is going to be the day I start HRT. That's...
I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you.
No, and I
Yeah.
Thank you, friend. I know you're on the verge of starting to, so like we're in this together. There is so much more I want to say, but in the interest of getting this video out in a reasonable time frame, well, here. I don't regret girlhood. The good or the bad. Our childhoods inform us. I would not be the person I am today without my girlhood. But they don't define us. And I think I'm ready to take control of how I define myself, more so than I ever have. I'm done waiting. And I'm done grieving. Transitioning as a content creator is going to be interesting, I think. My transition is going to be extremely public, and I haven't decided if that's a good or a bad thing. It's gonna be a weird journey, one that you all will be participants in. I think that's the part that makes me nervous, but not afraid. Whatever is about to come, I've survived worse. And I'm lucky to have a lot of incredible people in my corner. Thank you, of course, to the trans creators who took the time to talk to me for this little project. To Cafe Foxtail, Celerity Dust, Lycanthropic VT, Stella Cosmister, and Wonder Aria. Altogether, I ended up with over 13 hours of interview footage to sort through, very little of which I could find a place for here. I desperately wish I could share more of their lives with you, but trust me when I say they're all wonderful people who are worth your time and attention. Thank you as well to my childhood friend for being the reason this video finally got made. While he'll be staying anonymous for both of our safety, know that his drag is incredible. Thank you especially to the punks in my local community for giving me the resources and the courage to take this step. Florida punks are genuinely the coolest people I have ever met. And thank you to my community here at the archive. The folks who have stuck with me through endless bullshit. I'm working really hard to build something meaningful here. In the meantime, signing off from the archive. And remember, the first Pride was a riot.